Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show, wherever you're watching us around the world. Ukraine, just days away from the first anniversary of the day Russia launched its war. We'll speak to the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace shortly to find out what further help we'll be sending Ukraine's way and how that will affect our forces back home. As the NATO chief says, Ukraine is using ammunition faster than its allies can provide it. Plus, we're about to find out if the government is on course to bring down inflation. That figure very shortly. It's Wednesday, the 15th of February.
I'm live here in Brussels, where Britain's Defence Secretary will join other NATO defence ministers for talks on how to support Ukraine and stand firm in the face of a new Russian offensive.
Off the back of the Chinese spying scandal, now warning for UK police forces that the UK is riddled with drone surveillance equipment all owned by China.
Happiness and heartbreak. A toddler with a fatal genetic disease has been successfully treated with the world's most expensive drug, but it's too late to save her 3-year-old sister. The parents forced to choose between their children or their career. The Sky News reveals nursery fees could rise by £1,000 this year.
After just paying childcare fees, I would have been working for £20 a month.
Pleased to hold a news conference at the search for missing mum of 2, Nicola Bulley, continues. We're there live. Never going back, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer will try to end the arguments over antisemitism, which have split the party. We'll bring that to you live at 9 o'clock.
We're live in Adana in southern Turkey with the latest on what's happening here, just over a week on from the devastating earthquake.
And could Brexit really be hurting conservation efforts? Zookeepers say breeding programmes for some of the rarest species are being stopped because of red tape. All of that to come. Busy programme for you here on The Breakfast Show this morning. We start, though, with that breaking news on the state of the economy. Let's get more, should we? Our business correspondent, Gurpreet, is with me now. Better than expected?
Yeah, better than expected. A glimmer of good news, actually, because although inflation is still rising far too quickly above the Bank of England's 2% target, it has come down from that peak of 11.1% that you might have remembered last year. The figure, 10.1%, was lower than expected. Most economists had penciled in a figure of 10.3%. But crucially, it's in line with the Bank of England's own forecasts that it set out a few months ago, which means that inflation is falling just how policymakers would like it to be. This has just dropped, so we don't know what the causes of inflation or falling inflation are yet, but I'll find out what they are and come back to you on that. But all of this suggests that interest rates should hopefully start coming down soon. Members of the rate setting committee, that's the Bank of England's rate setting committee, have in recent weeks been making noises that interest rates could start coming down, and this is all positive signs in that direction. They don't want to be going too quickly, but all of it suggests that after the peak into the summer, interest rates might start falling back. OK, I know that you're going to update us on those figures, aren't you? Thanks very much indeed. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is with us from Brussels. Mr Wallace, good morning. Thought on the inflation figure, first of all, please. Good morning.
Well, good morning, Kay, and welcome back from your trips. Look, I think, look, it's the right direction. It's positive. I think it shows that the government's efforts alongside others to try and make sure that we deal with inflation, because inflation is really the number one enemy to the economy, is in the right direction. But, we've got a long way to go. We'll have to keep working on it. I think as your commentator said, the Bank of England's target is 2% and we're at 10%. And no one likes to be living in a place of high inflation. But I really welcome the direction of travel, and we must keep working at it.
OK, let's talk about money, should we? An uphill battle with the Treasury. How much money do you need just to stand still?
OK, I've been in this game long enough. I think been a minister for God knows how many years, but it's always an uphill battle with the Treasury, no matter what department you're in. It's the right thing that a Secretary of State will argue for an increase to meet their priorities. And of course, between now and the budget, I've got lots of time and lots of meetings with the Chancellor to make sure that we try and come to a deal on it. And I think, I haven't hidden the fact that we suffer from inflation pressures, as does departments with big capital spending. That's spending on hardware and infrastructure, because, of course, that's where inflation goes to. But, we'll see. I'm not going to conduct the negotiations in public, but obviously we're going to try and make our way through this so that between now and the next spending review, which is in 2 years' time, we can insulate defence from many of those pressures.
So you're looking, according to the Times, for between 8 and 11 billion?
I've seen lots of reports of how much I'm looking for. As I said, Kay, I'm not going to conduct negotiations with the Treasury in public. I think we've got plenty of time. I'm very much conscious of the overall government's ambition, which is to drive down inflation, as I've just said earlier in the programme. That is key. That, of course, means it's going to pinch all of us in all our departments, because ultimately the answer cannot therefore be to flood everything with extra spending or more borrowing. But I also know that we have a growing threat on the world stage, and that's why I'll obviously negotiate with the Treasury about where we can get to cover the next 2 years before we get to the next comprehensive spending review.
So are you going to roll over then, or is it an issue of resignation if you don't get what you want?
No, let's just go to the budget, Kay. I think first and foremost, the most important thing is that I present a good case to the Chancellor, a good case to the Prime Minister, and of course the Prime Minister and Chancellor together will discuss how we can get overall within the spending envelope. That's the spending review. We need to indicate to the markets that we're not going to sort of just break our own fiscal disciplines, and then we'll see what I get at the end. But this is not about resigning or anything else. It's about delivering defence to meet the threat. That's my duty to the public, no matter what political party I am or anyone else. My successors will be the same, is to be able to fund defence to protect us from the likes of Russia and other countries around the world.
So suggestions in the papers that you'd resign if you didn't get what you wanted at Tosh?
I don't know where that comes from. But Kay, at this moment, I have to tell you, there's an awful lot of speculation in the newspapers. Most of it seems to be untrue.
OK. When are we sending fighter jets to Ukraine?
Well, at the moment, I've been quite clear with that, is first and foremost what we're focusing on is delivering for Ukraine the effects that they need, which is either the ability to strike in the deep, that's at longer range, and that's why things like the M270 or the HIMARS are in, and indeed the use of UAVs that can drop munitions is another way of delivering that effect. The other one is the effect of anti-air that is required, which a fighter can deliver, but also surface-to-air missiles, which is why the international community has donated now thousands of anti-air missiles. I think the first point is the effect. In the long term, what we've got to do is help Ukraine's resilience, potentially post-conflict, to make sure that they can defend themselves in their skies. And that's why training people to fly fighter jets is an important step in that direction. But, the key here is that these are fighter jets. These are not handheld anti-tank weapons. These are aircraft that take not only months to train on, but also aircraft that require effectively a very substantial pit crew to support it. If you think about, it's very different gifting a sort of normal car that you and I might drive around with and a Formula One car. If you gift a Formula One car, it comes with a pit crew. It needs the crew to start it. It needs the crew to service it. It is a long tail that goes with a fighter aircraft. And I think, we can help Ukraine sooner by delivering the effects they need on the battlefield rather than the platform-specific request.
Can't give them enough ammunition, though, can we?
I think we're giving them lots of ammunition, and we continue to do so. If you look at the amount of the international community has donated, we're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition. Munitions, we continue to put in £2.3 billion worth of support within this financial year, and another £2.3 billion next year. And we are actually putting in a huge amount, Kay. The questions that we will be making sure we help with is getting it delivered, getting it across the border. Remember, we can't fly in this equipment because of Russia's efforts to shoot down anything that would be flying, and we bring them in, obviously, across border, and we make sure we get it to them in the front line. And look, the Ukrainians are doing a fantastic job, and under very difficult circumstances. The latest sort of Russian effort around a mining town, Balula, produced, sadly, but nevertheless necessarily, the Ukrainian fight made sure that literally a brigade of Russians was wiped out over the last week. That's nearly over 1,000 men. killed because of poor Russian equipment and poor Russian strategy.
Are China hacking our CCTV cameras?
Well, they're not. Hopefully, I don't think they are hacking our sensitive CCTV cameras, and we take every effort to protect areas that are sensitive from anybody hacking it, whether it's China or whether it is another nation. And there are two parts, Kay, to protecting our infrastructure. One is to make sure that the quality of the equipment we buy is protected from being hacked, and that doesn't really matter who makes it. It's making sure that if we buy sort of cheap knockoffs, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be more vulnerable. And whether you're buying for your home equipment or whether you're buying for a government organisation or a local council or a business, you should always make sure you're buying good quality as a way to protect yourself. And then the second one is, as you point out, whether or not we think there are particularly vulnerabilities in products sourced from certain countries such as China. And you'll remember the Huawei debate where the government took a decision that it would rid its sensitive networks of anything to do with Huawei, and that's the direction of travel we're going in.
Are we doing enough to help the people in the earthquake zone in southeastern Turkey and northwestern Syria? The British public raised £65 million in 4 days. Doing the maths, it looks as though the government has given maybe about £11 million worth of aid so far. Is there more coming?
Well, first of all, Kay, there's aid in cash and there's aid in kind. I've deployed a Roll 2 hospital, which I think is going to be set up from today. I've deployed a C-130 Hercules with a critical care crew that can move casualties around Turkey. We've provided lots of transport, A400 aircraft, to move in both humanitarian aid and other aid. And I'm here in NATO today where the Secretary General has asked me if there's any more airlift I can provide to help NATO supplies go in of humanitarian aid, and we're going to do that. So in kind, I think we've provided and will continue to provide an awful lot in value. I almost daily speak to or I'm in text engagement or indeed communicate with my Turkish counterpart, Minister Akar. Only the day before yesterday, I offered him troops if he needed it to help in that humanitarian effort. And for now, we are in the hands of the Turkish authorities and the United Nations in Syria. That if they request more, we are very, very open to looking at that.
OK, let's just finish briefly where we started. The Treasury thinks the MOD wastes money. Do you?
Well, I think the Treasury will make that point as I asked for more money. Look, historically, the MOD has bought into equipment that I think hasn't necessarily delivered. But remember, 85% of our procurements are on budget, on time. Some of the major projects, they span 20 years. And in that time, threat changes, technology changes, and inflation changes. And of course, that often leads to very difficult conversations about either how many units we can buy in the end or indeed cost control. But it can be better. You'll be glad to know that since I became Defence Secretary, we've delivered a balanced budget for 2 years and heading towards 3. That's the first, I think, almost since the war that we've managed to get those results consistently. But, I'm fixing projects that were commissioned as far back as the Labour government. The Ajax vehicle, which is often quoted, was commissioned in March 2010 and has been a troubled programme. And we're now in a place where I think it's back on track. It's passed its first level of trials and we're into its next set. So, I think you can't hold the sins of my forefathers against me. I'm determined to make sure we change those practices. But that doesn't also change the fact that threat is growing. And what we've seen since 1991, since the end of the Cold War, is a consistent, effectively, raiding of the defence budget over time. And maybe a peace dividend was appropriate straight after the Cold War. We had huge armies in Europe. The Cold War finished, and it was right that the taxpayer who'd invested in defence got a return on that. The problem is that continued and has continued to far too many decades as the threat has increased. And I've been very open here that the threat has increased, and just like other parts of government, when threat increases, we should reconsider how much we fund it, which is why Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, gave us £16 billion extra back in 2020. It was the first real turning of the corner with real money rather than sort of fantasy efficiency saving, the things that were supposedly the way they used to fund that sort of increase. And that has allowed us to start modernising our armed forces, which has been desperately needed, but genuinely start to modernise our armed forces.
OK. Hopefully Jeremy Hunt was listening to you. Good to talk to you as always. Safe journey back home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam Parsons standing by for us in Brussels this morning. Adam, your thoughts. Good morning to you.
Yeah, there's a lot in there to unpick. I mean, Ben Wallace is right, of course, is that the United Kingdom is not the only member of NATO that has gone through a bit of soul-searching recently about whether they cut back too far on defence spending, that whether they've reduced their capability and are now having to step it up again. I think, as ever, the United States, when it arrives at NATO, you can almost feel that kind of sigh that comes out when the US frankly thinks that it is carrying a disproportionate burden. That is something that former President Donald Trump came out very clearly and said, but if you ever talk to American diplomats, they do look at the figures and notice just how much they are spending. And they'll say it again here, is that the US does feel that it is largely bankrolling the resistance to Ukraine. Frankly, you go across NATO, you will discover that the Germans, the French, the European Union, and of course the British and the Americans all think that they're leading the resistance to Ukraine. Interesting to see what Mr. Wallace talked about in terms of those specifics. And I think he is echoing what we've heard from a number of people, both on and off the record, in terms of this discussion about fighter jets. Clearly, Volodymyr Zelensky came and did a big pitch for fighter jets in the UK and across Europe. But the resistance to that diplomatically has always been that F-22s are incredibly complicated. They take so much effort that I think NATO has coalesced around this idea that what it really needs to do is provide the things Ukraine needs for an attritional ground war. And that is about munitions and ammunitions and the shells that Ukraine is using up at a huge rate.
OK, for now, thank you. Ashna standing by for us actually at the Ministry of Defence as well this morning in central London. Ashna, CCTV, are the Chinese spying on us? Don't think so, he said.
No, Ben Wallace was quite quick there to defend the fact that many of the CCTV cameras used across the UK, in his words, were of quality and haven't been bought cheaply. The watchdog in this scenario does disagree with a lot of that. He says 43 police forces across England and Wales, the National Crime Agency, and in government buildings like the one behind me in the Ministry of Defence, they are, in fact, these Chinese-made CCTV cameras, but also surveillance equipment in use and drones as well. The UK has fast become one of the most watched countries in the world, most surveyed countries in the world. And what this raises questions about is not only surveillance and privacy, and not only about who is watching us, but how that information is being analysed too, who is accessing that information, and in what way is that quite sensitive data and potentially footage is being accessed and being used, and in what way. What we have found in this report, Fraser Sampson says that the UK is riddled with these security cameras, because often we find that many of these Chinese security cameras are using quite advanced analytical software. It includes things like facial recognition, vehicle identification and object tracking, things that aren't just necessarily watching over people's every move in a retrospective way, but is live recording people's movements. Even as we stand here behind me, the Ministry of Justice, I've counted about 6 cameras that are watching us. And of course, that's a government building, but it's who else is watching us? That's the big question.
Indeed so, and I thank you. Well, the White House says 3 unidentified objects shot down from the skies last week were likely to be benign. 3 objects shot down over both the US and Canada were said to be much smaller than the suspected Chinese spy balloon. Officials have drawn a clear distinction between the 3 objects and the balloon which flew into US airspace near a military base, which they suspect was involved in surveillance. Still to come on the programme for you, we'll chat more about the UFOs that have been making headlines this past week, spying or simply flying. Is Labour at peace over anti-Semitism? Labour MP Dame Margaret Hodge might not agree. We'll hear from her shortly. And the race to rearm Ukraine. I'm going to be speaking to the former director of the British Army Staff just after 8 o'clock. 19-month-old baby with a fatal genetic disease has the chance of a normal life thanks to the world's most expensive gene therapy drug. Teddy Shaw and her elder sister, Nala, were both diagnosed with a rare condition that damages the organs and nervous system. The family have said, although there is hope, Amongst the pain for Teddy, thanks to the drug listed at almost £3 million, 3-year-old Nala is too far advanced in her illness to benefit from the treatment. Meantime, parents, particularly mums, are being forced to choose between their career and their children because of the cost of childcare. New figures obtained by Sky News show that nurseries are expected to raise their fees by an average of £1,000 this year, yet they're already amongst the most expensive in the whole world. Tamara has been looking into this for us, actually. Hi, Tamara, tell us more.
Morning, Kay. Well, the soaring cost of childcare, we're looking at for a toddler attending full-time about £14,000 a year in the UK, is set to go up again this year. And even families with 2 incomes who think they're doing OK are having to have one parent give up work, usually the mum, in order to pay for childcare. I spoke to a family in this situation and looked at how widespread it is. This is my report.
Are we having a ponytail or a bun today?
It's 7:30 and 3-year-old Harriet is nearly ready for preschool. Her parents have always worked, but for baby brother Bobby, the cost of childcare is now beyond their reach.
Once we worked it out, after just paying childcare fees, I would have been working for £20 a month.
Mum Becky feels she's been forced to give up her job in sales. She'll stay at home, and the family will rely on the wages of her partner Steve, an electrician.
Must have been a daunting decision for you, giving up your career.
I always wanted to be a working mum. You know, never envisaged myself being a stay-at-home parent and, you know, just cooking, cleaning, bringing children up. I'm not asking other people to pay for my children. And I definitely don't want people's taxes to go up because of it. You know, I think we need to look at where the assigned tax is to pay for what services, and even just slightly subsidise the cost of fees so it's affordable.
Caring for and educating the very youngest children is a costly business, but those costs are rising at an eye-watering rate. A survey for Sky News by the Early Years Alliance found childcare providers will raise fees by an average of 8% this year, around £1,000 for a child under 3 attending full-time. Already 2/3 of parents say they spend more on childcare than on their rent or mortgage. Parents of 3- and 4-year-olds get 15 free hours a week, or 30 if both parents are working. So their costs are usually lower. But that leaves a gap for children under 3.
We end up in a situation where the youngest children have the highest prices they're ever going to pay with the least access to government support, and it's coming at this critical moment where parents are making the decision about whether or not to go back to work after they've been on parental leave.
Both political parties are working on a new childcare offer for parents ahead of the next election. The challenge is to make a real impact on family finances, which doesn't cut corners for children.
So mums having to give up work because they literally just can't afford to send their children to nurseries.
People in good jobs who thought they were going to be OK, perhaps were able to pay for their first child to be in childcare, are now finding it so expensive that it's simply not worth them working. They would be losing money. Now, Conservative MPs are really ratcheting up the pressure on the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, saying he should take action in the March budget to help parents, particularly of 1- and 2-year-olds, because that's when the mums are having to make these decisions to give up work, to put more money into it. Now, an idea that he was drawn up for him to extend free childcare hours to 2-year-olds, I understand, is not happening because it's been ruled as too expensive. Now, the Department of Education tell me that they are looking at options to improve the cost, flexibility and availability of childcare, and have spent a record amount, have spent £20 billion over the last 5 years, but clearly it's not working for a lot of parents, and I think there's going to be growing pressure for the Chancellor to change the system.
OK, budget next month, of course. Tomorrow for now, thank you. In other news, researchers in the United States have said a game-changing male contraceptive pill that reduces fertility quickly and temporarily could be possible. A study by Weill Cornell Medicine found the pill was 100% effective in the first 2 hours, reducing to 91% within 3 hours, and showed no negative health impacts when taken for 6 weeks. Virgin Orbit says the reason its rocket broke up on its first flight out of the UK was because a fuel filter was dislodged. The launcher, one rocket, broke up as it was due to take 9 satellites into orbit after taking off from Spaceport Cornwall. The payloads crashed into the Atlantic. New sentencing guidelines have been published to clamp down on retailers who sell knives to children. The legislation, which comes into force in England and Wales on the 1st of April, could mean huge fines for large organisations and individual shopkeepers who sell knives to under 18-year-olds without proper safeguards. Police are expected to hold a news conference later on today as the search for missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley, continues. Miss Bulley disappeared while walking her dog in the village of St Michael's on Wyre in Lancashire on the 27th of January. Lancashire police say they believe the 45-year-old fell into the River Wyre. Charlotte Drake, who's lived next door to Nicola and her family for 5 years, spoke of the hell she's faced since her friend went missing.
She's one of us. That's, I think, why it's hit so many of us so hard around here, the women, the mums, because we've all done this walk. It feels like it could have been any one of us. And as a person, she's so caring and so considerate. We have to give that back to her and that level of effort that I know she would be giving to us.
Let's find out what's happening. I should say we will be there at the scene with Inzi in the next hour. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Next few days will be more unsettled than recently, but the southeast will stay largely fine and dry today.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now then, what to wear for a coronation? Here is a clue. In the past, every new Queen consort would have a jewel-encrusted crown specially made for a coronation. However, this year, in the interests of sustainability, Camilla has opted to wear the crown of one of her forebearers, Queen Mary's 1911 crown, albeit with a brilliant upgrade. It will be reset with diamonds from Queen Elizabeth II's personal jewellery collection in tribute to the late Queen. That's rather beautiful, isn't it? Now, how about this for your Wednesday morning earworm and something to lift your spirits? Brexit really hurting conservation efforts? Zookeepers are saying breeding programmes for some of the rarest species are being stopped because of red tape. 9:45, speaking to the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Stay tuned to find out if Brexit is stopping us from helping little ones like him. Also still to come on the programme for you, taken hostage at gunpoint. But who is he? Who's holding him, and what will it take to get him free? More after the break. And more on anti-Semitism with Labour. Hello again, everybody. Let me tell you about the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. He was on the programme a short time ago. He says he's in an uphill battle with the Treasury over his defence budget. He's under pressure to boost spending on the armed forces and is also being pressed to send more weapons and ammunition to Ukraine. But he says his conversations with the Treasury are not bringing him to the brink of resignation. Are you going to roll over then, or is it an issue of resignation if you don't get what you want?
No, let's just go to the budget, Kay. I think first and foremost, the most important thing is that I present a good case to the Chancellor, a good case to the Prime Minister, and of course the Prime Minister and Chancellor together will discuss how we can get overall within the spending envelope, that's the spending review, we must indicate to the markets that we're not going to sort of just break our own fiscal disciplines.
So suggestions in the papers that you'd resign if you didn't get what you wanted at Tosh?
I don't know where that comes from. But, you know, Kay, at this moment, I have to tell you, there's an awful lot of speculation in the newspapers. Most of it seems to be untrue.
He also told me that he would continue to speak to his opposite number in Turkey, and if troops were needed to help with that recovery operation, then they would certainly be sent to help. UN saying its first convoy carrying aid to the victims of last week's earthquakes has entered the rebel-held region of northwest Syria after passing through a newly opened border crossing. Let's have a look. Number of people killed in the earthquake in Turkey and Syria has now reached 41,000 people, 41,000, as part of an agreement with the United Nations. President Assad has opened up 2 further border crossings to get aid into rebel-held parts of the country. There you go. Until now, there's only been 1 open border crossing from Turkey into Syria, and that's the Bab al-Hawa. The new crossing at Bab al-Salam and al-Rai for an initial period of 3 months. These will allow aid into opposition-held parts of northern Syria, such as Idlib, which was so badly impacted by the earthquake. Meanwhile, in southeastern Turkey, anger is growing at the government's apparent failure to ensure building standards were maintained, making the earthquake's destruction even worse. Cordelia visited Antakya and Adana and sent this report.
Every time they hear the helicopter here, there's a sudden burst of hope and a rush of adrenaline. The staff at Adana City Hospital are still receiving survivors. This time, it's a 26-year-old teacher.
This is astonishing to see. More than a week after the earthquake hit, this woman has managed to pull through. What strength that must have taken, and what horror she must have endured.
This is the moment Emine Akgul was discovered. It's more than 200 hours since her 6-story building has collapsed. She's exhausted, on the edge of life and death.
In the 8 days she's been trapped, she might be suffering tissue damage due to hunger and thirst. Our patients will most likely suffer from renal failure, and that's why we'll have to monitor her in our intensive care unit.
It's hard to fathom how anyone made it through these doors, especially 8-month-old Birce. She fell from the 5th floor. Her leg is broken, but doctors are hopeful she'll make a full recovery. Her mother, Nilay, thought she'd lost all 3 of her children.
At first, when I called out to my kids, I didn't hear any response. I didn't want to get out alive then. I thought, how will I survive this if my family are no more?
Amazingly, Birce and her eldest sister did make it. But in the rubble, Nilay found the body of her other child.
All of my daughters are miracles, but I am without one. I have lost her. Now I'm seeking refuge in my daughter Birce, being alive. I find solace in her.
In Antakya, the burden of the search is heavy. Mounds of despair everywhere. But no one is ready to let go. The night before, a couple was rescued, and now the race is on to find their 26-year-old son.
You don't hear sounds anymore. After 3-4 days, you cannot see sounds, but you say, if you hear my voice, can you please hit against the wall with something? Any kind of noise. And we have some gadgets, sonar gadgets, we can hear clearly, even if it's scratching the wall with the nails.
But after an agonizing wait, the worst news. The family forced to identify his body. The loss here is as cruel as it is coarse. Yet still they search, looking for any little clue that may help them salvage life, or at very least, honour the dead.
Cordelia is with us now. Hi, Cordelia. It really is very much a recovery operation now, isn't it? Is support still coming through?
Yes, I mean, it's a mixed picture, Kay, depending on where you are in the south of the country. You know, in these big cities, we're seeing
large rescue operations, a lot of heavy equipment and machinery, but there are those isolated villages and communities where help hasn't got through, where there is still a lot of people suspected dead that families are desperately hoping they can pull from the rubble. Now, Britain has been offering its help. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, saying he is willing to provide more troops if and when needed to Turkey. I think what is striking at the moment here is the growing anger and frustration around the safety of these buildings, Kay. A lot of people concerned that amnesties were granted to buildings that the government, that others knew was simply not safe. And I think we'll see more questions levied at them and at contractors who we know have been arrested over the last few days. Help needed here, help desperately needed, of course, in Syria, where 3 aid routes are now opened for the next 3 months at least. But so much still needed there, Kay.
Bernard, thank you. Breaking news, and 2 people have been charged following the deaths of a 16-year-old Bryony Gay, a 15-year-old girl from Warrington and a 15-year-old boy from Lee in Lancashire have been charged with murder. Bryony's body was discovered in Linear Park in Culcheth on Saturday afternoon. Jeremy Corbyn's time as Labour Party leader was fraught with claims of anti-Semitism which split the party. Today, Keir Starmer wants to show the arguments are over. Joined now by Labour MP for Barking Dame, Margaret Hodge, one of those worst affected by the rise. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. Your leader will say later on today in a speech that the party has changed. What proof is there?
Well, let's just take the anti-Semitism first. That one of the first phone calls that Keir Starmer made after he became elected leader was to me and to other Jews who had suffered under the time of Jew hate with Corbyn. And he promised us then that he would demonstrate zero tolerance to anti-Semitism, and he's acted. So we've got a completely new complaints mechanism. It's much speedier, it's much more accountable and transparent. People have been expelled from the Labour Party in their hundreds, and we've had intensive training of Labour Party members and decision makers to ensure that they are totally aware of what constitutes anti-Semitism. That's one bit, but the party's changed much more fundamentally. If you think about things like our attitude in the economy to businesses, the way that we approach business, that's a complete transformation from the days of Corbyn. Or if you think about us on the global stage that you're looking at now, we are now firmly working with NATO and with the West to ensure stability for our values in the global world. All that is a massive transformational change. It's not superficial.
Yeah, but if he was so appalled by the way the party was behaving under Jeremy Corbyn, why didn't he stop it at the time? He was part of the cabinet.
I think that time was horribly difficult, putting myself back into it. People had to take personal decisions as to how they were going to respond to the appalling circumstances in which we found ourselves.
Anti-Semitism is wrong, isn't it? And, you know, you have to stand up and be counted as a politician, and he was part of that cabinet, and he let it go on.
Well, let me just say this, that some members felt so terrible about it they left. I was among those people that decided to fight it from within, and Keir decided to fight it privately. And I think those were really, really, really difficult decisions to take at the time. But what I can say to you is Keir's leadership, since he became elected as leader of the Labour Party, you just can't quarrel with it. If you'd said to me, Kay, 2 years ago, when we had that terrible report, horrific day with the EHRC saying that we were guilty of Jew hate, if you'd said to me, 2 years on things will be different and you'll be given a clean bill of health, I wouldn't have believed you. So I'm proud to say that I was wrong. I lived through the 80s when we were fighting militant, and it took much, much longer then. And I think the reason we've been able to manage it much more quickly now is actually that clear, determined, detailed, sort of absolutely driven leadership that we've had from Keir Starmer.
Yeah, since he took over, apparently it's reported there have been 700 anti-Semitism cases. Has the problem really gone away?
No, and I'll tell you why it won't have totally gone away. If you allow something like that anti-Jew hate to move from the fringes of your party into the mainstream. It takes time to transform the culture. We've put everything in place. It's a zillion times better. We're beginning to see things emerging. You know, I talk about flowers blooming. So Barnet, which was an area with a very strong population, voted Labour in the local elections. We're beginning to get stunningly strong Labour people, Jewish people standing as Labour candidates. But is it all dealt with? No, we've got to keep our foot on the accelerator and transforming that culture to restore it to the party that I joined because I am a Jew and because I fight racism. To restore it to those values, its basic values, will always take time.
It was a dark chapter in the party's history. Will it always be marred by that?
I think we'll get... No, I don't think it will be. I think people now are so focused on providing an alternative party and government that will provide hope, that will ensure that we're not corrupt, which is the things that we're facing now, that really will invest in health and education and deal with the cost of living crisis. I think it will diminish. But let me just say this: I don't want us to forget it completely, because I don't want it ever to happen again.
Here's a tricky one for the end. What should happen to Jeremy Corbyn?
Oh, I've absolutely no doubt about that. I think can't think of any circumstance in which Jeremy Corbyn could ever stand as a Labour candidate again.
Still a member of the party, isn't he?
He's still a member of the party.
Should he be allowed to be?
Well, I think the most important thing is that he will not stand as a candidate. It's a matter of his own doing. He's been the master of his own destiny. He knew what he did. He knows what he feels.
Would he be banned from the party?
Well, I think the party's moved on, actually, ironically. I think I've moved on, the party's moved on, the country's moved on. They're now voting for us again. And if you're somebody who promotes anti-Jew hate, if you're somebody who thinks that we shouldn't be talking to business,
should you be allowed to be a member of the Labour Party?
If you're somebody who is anti-NATO, I think you should be walking away from the Labour Party.
Yes,
it's not your party.
Should he be banned from the party? Why are you being so hesitant?
Well, I'm not being hesitant. I just think at the moment, it's a matter for him. He's got to...
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Before the break, we teased and asked if you knew whose birthday it was today. We gave you a few clues about her being a Bond girl and the like. Well, did you guess? 72nd birthday for Jane Seymour, the actress who played Solitaire in Live and Let Die, the love interest of Sir Roger Moore's James Bond. She also won 2 Golden Globes, one for East of Eden, great movie, and another for Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, plus an Emmy for Onassis, the richest man in the world. Good for her. Now, US officials say the last 3 of the 4 objects shot down in the skies over both America and Canada could be benign commercial or research efforts, but there's still little information on the original suspected surveillance balloon. Let's get a quick reminder of what happened. Here we go. The suspected Chinese spy balloon became of concern earlier this month when it was tracked above the town of Billings in Montana, around 200 miles from a nuclear missile field at Malmstrom Air Force Base. There you go. 4th of Feb, on the instruction from President Joe Biden, a US F-22 fighter jet shot down the suspected Chinese spy balloon off the South Carolina coast. There you go. Last Friday, President Biden ordered a fighter jet to shoot down an unidentified high-altitude object off northern Alaska. Dead horse, love it. Now, the White House said the object was the size of a small car and posed a reasonable threat to civilian aviation. Alaska is home to 9 military bases. On Saturday, Canadian Prime Minister confirmed that a US F-22 jet accompanied by Canadian aircraft shot down an unidentified object over the mountainous and sparsely populated territory of Yukon in the Canadian Northwest, a region which borders the United States. Alaska side. And last Sunday, a US F-16 jet fired a missile and downed another unidentified object over Lake Huron on the US-Canadian border. US authorities say the object flew near sensitive military sites and could have been used for spying. So, what is going on, spying, flying, or simply keeping an eye on the weather. For more now, joined by author and astronomer David Whitehouse. Hi, it's always great to see you. Thanks for coming in. What's going on?
Well, the first object was definitely a spy balloon.
Yeah.
It was obvious from the pictures of it that it was too large to be meteorological. It had large solar panels, large equipment, so that was obviously a spy balloon. And what seems to have happened is that these are fairly small objects, really, in the sky, and they move slowly, and America was not looking for them. And I think that China took advantage of this and of the general American Air Force dismisses UFOs. They took advantage of this gap in their space surveillance of their airspace and were sort of floating these spy platforms in. As you say, it went over American base, and it was probably doing something like intercepting cell phone communications among military personnel and whatever it could suck up from signal intelligence. The other three, since then, seem to be a bit of a mystery because although, as you said, the Americans say they are benign, one of them does seem to be large. One of them does seem to, they said, was octagonal with sort of tethers emerging from it. And it was hard to see how something like that has the propulsion to stay airborne. So they're probably meteorological, scientific platforms, or even spy platforms from another nation that have been taking advantage of this gap in surveillance. But of course, we need the debris from the ground, which is difficult to obtain.
Why do they need to do that? I thought they had stuff in space that they could read number plates from.
They can, and I'm sure that America would be looking at its spy satellites on its own territory to see if it could see these things. But in the past, there have been UFOs, which America has either dismissed as being unimportant, ignored. So they may have sort of fallen under the radar from that, so to speak, although there is a category of UFOs called Tic Tacs, these small ones that were seen by American fighter pilots, which are a genuine mystery. Nobody knows what they are, but they seem to be different from the type of things that's fallen over Canada. So it's an emerging new subject, if you like.
Sadly,
we're seeing things we haven't seen.
OK, we are out of time, but hopefully you'll come back and talk about them in more detail. Thank you very much indeed. More to come in just a moment. Stay tuned.